everyone, to podcast number 10. My guest today is Lora-Renard, an international speaker on A Course in Miracles. Cindy is coming on this podcast for the fourth time this year. She is the author of A Course in Health and Well-Being, as well as a spiritual life coach with a master's degree in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. For more information on Cindy's work, CDs, books that she's written, YouTube videos and podcasts, and international meetings and presentations, please visit her website at www.cindylora.com. Welcome, everyone.
Cindy, what a pleasure to have you again in a conversation with me and our listeners. This is podcast number 4. And today I want to choose a topic that is very close to my heart, and that of many people who find themselves in vulnerable living situations. It is a term that is used a lot among people who live with cancer. It's a metaphor, and the term is emotional cancer, quote unquote. It is a term that refers to living in denial, not living your truth, compromising your well-being, your values and ethics, and living in accordance to someone else's standards in order to protect that person and their poor behavior, because somehow you feel responsible for it. And this is a dynamic that many individuals find themselves in. And then it becomes almost a choice. You either get sick or you live your truth. When we live in incongruence with our truth and compromise it for the sake of another being, emotional cancer may start to breed. ACIM does not say or encourages anyone to live in this state, even if the world is a projection from a tiny mad idea. And I want to talk to you about that. What would the Course say to someone that is living in emotional cancer, not living their truth and compromising their well-being and their health and their psychological and emotional well-being for another person? What does the Course have to say about that?
That is a very profound question, because I think it runs very deep. It's a very important question to ask ourselves. A Course in Miracles, perspective would definitely be that it's a very loving and kind and compassionate thing to do, to live your authentic self and not compromise on what is naturally extending through you. The inspiration that you are receiving about your life really has nothing to do with anyone else. It's about tuning in, and it can be a very loving thing to do, to start to question ourselves if we feel that we're veering off the path of our authenticity. And so it would not have anything against that. In fact, it would say it's not very loving to pretend that things are going really well when they're not. It's not very loving to sort of wash over, our emotions and feelings. It does say there's only 2 emotions that we have, and that's love and fear. And one was given us by God, and that is love, of course. And fear was made by us, all of us as one collective ego mind. And when we get trapped up in the fear emotion, which can take many, many different forms, it can take the form of depression, anxiety, not feeling worthy of really stepping up and living your authentic self. It can take a lot of different forms, the fear. So the Course's perspective would be to look really right at any fear-based emotion without judging it. And this way you're able to, when it says look with the Holy Spirit, or look with Jesus, who's the voice of the Course, which means you're not looking at these feelings on your own. And he says, when you look and not judge, there's a part of you that recognizes that you can watch yourself. You can be the observer of yourself. Your decision-making mind is like watching you having the thoughts that you're having. They could be thoughts again of low self-esteem, self-worth, that you're unhappy about something. Maybe you're worried or uncertain and you're not living up to your what you feel is your authenticity. It could be with someone, a partner, a friend, it doesn't matter, a family member. But if there's something in your life where you find that you're not being true to yourself, the Course would encourage you to look at that, because that is a very loving thing to do. You don't have to play small, and
Wow.
push yourself down, right? You don't have to hide your
Yes.
light to make someone feel better, someone else feel better.
I really love what you said about it is not loving not to live your truth. It is really not loving to
Right.
compromise your well-being and your truth and your light for someone else. That is not loving.
That's right. It's and we confuse that. We think, to the ego mind, we think that is love. We think it's
Right?
love.
I'm going to sacrifice
Right?
myself,
Right. Yes.
right? For another
Yep.
person, I'm going to sacrifice my truth and compromise my truth for
Yes.
somebody else, because somehow I believe their behavior is my responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, so many of us do that, right? We think a lot of us do that. We fall into that.
A lot of us do that, especially women, women. And that's why I want to talk about this, especially because we're nurturers. We take care of our kids, we take care of our husbands, we take care of our partners, right? So let me put myself down. Let me make myself little. Let me not live my truth for your truth, because that's loving. You are my responsibility. And so I need to compromise my well-being and my truth and my light for you, for me to be a good person. They're very interesting, and then there's the power of silence that breeds poor behavior. So the more I compromise, the more I'm silent about your poor behavior, the more I give you power.
Right.
And that's not loving.
It's not
that's
loving.
not loving.
Right. Yeah. And it's very easy to do. It's so easy.
Oh, yes.
It becomes a habit where we just realize, oh my gosh, I've been completely giving my power away. And it can, and sometimes what happens is you get your own signs and symptoms that you need to really look at something. Right?
Yes. And that's exactly it. Yes. You start getting headaches. Some of the organs start shutting down. It's like your whole body's trying to stop you and telling, what are you doing to me? Because our bodies have our back and say, what are you doing to me? This is not right. I'm malfunctioning. Stop feeding me those emotions and those thoughts. They're not congruent with what you really think, with what you really believe. And it was really interesting, because I was thinking the other day, what do you do with a child when a child misbehaves? I mean, the best, most loving thing to do is to go and give them appropriate feedback and say, look, what you're doing is not good. Come on, there's another way to do this. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? Right? You don't let the child misbehave and just either are silent, because that's just going to breed the same behavior over and over again. Or cheer them along. That's just only going to make it worse and give them permission to continue. Yes. So it's very important, leaving our truth, leaving our values and ethics, and living in accordance to our own standards. It's important. It's important. That's not loving. The Course doesn't say that that's loving.
That's right. And in fact, the Course, since it addresses the mind and not behavior, it does that because it knows when we are taking care of ourselves by how we're thinking and interpreting ourselves and the world and the people around us. And when we shift our perceptions from ego-based thinking to the Holy Spirit's perception, which recognizes that we're all the same, that we're all equally innocent, we are the same because we're all calling out for love or expressing love. And when we get in touch with that, the right-minded part of our minds, that is healing. Right-mindedness is healing. The Course says, and when we do that, then we naturally extend the love through us, and it can show up in form, though, as symbols of that awareness, of that abundance that we've chosen the Holy Spirit's perception. And that can show up, it can have all kinds of benefits on the level of form. But yes, it doesn't mean we don't address the level of form and address if there's an issue, but we can address it from a right-minded place. If we get ourselves centered first and know that, okay, where am I coming from as I sit down and talk to this person, right? Am I in my right mind?
Yeah.
First, because if I'm in my ego, it's just going to perpetuate the situation and make it more real to the unconscious mind, make it more upsetting. So I know in my own life, the key has always been, where is my starting point in my mind? Where am I? What is my attitude? How am I thinking about this person or situation? How am I thinking about myself? And if I find that I'm holding, if there's a grievance, if there's a worry or a doubt or fear, well, that tells me I'm still in my wrong mind. That would be the course's perspective, that we need to kind of switch, make that shift to the right mind. Then when you address conflict, it's going to come from a deeper place of peace and understanding as you're even communicating with someone. So you're not, we won't fall into the trap of projection onto ourselves or others. And that can be a very effective way of communicating, even if we feel we do have an issue with someone. We can kind of take care of our own minds first and then let that love extend through us. And then whatever way is most loving and helpful, it will present itself. It will kind of naturally extend, through. That's been my experience, although it hasn't always been easy, because it's easy to get into a habit of thinking so much so that you're living your life in a place of sacrifice so much that it becomes so normal that you almost you forget that that's not really loving. It's not really normal to do that. So it's really good to pay attention to those signs and symptoms that will present themselves as feedback. It's really feedback that lets us know, wait a minute, where am I in my mind about this?
You just made such an important point, and makes me think, because by training I'm also a neuroscientist, and I know a lot about forming habits and how the brain works. So talking about the level of form really in the bodies, those vessels that we inhabit for a while for the purpose of learning our lessons. It's very interesting. We form those neural connections. It's like neurons start forming communities of firing, and they fire and they live together. There's a pattern there that develops, and we form habits, and we are creatures of habit. And when we tell our bodies, look, this is what I value, and the feeling, the emotion that accompanies that value is one of joy, one of gentleness, one of kindness, the body encodes that, and it says, oh, okay, so that's your best state. And when I start behaving in discordance to what is my best state, that's when the body is giving me signals and says, because you no, don't go there, because you told me that what you value and what brings you joy and brings the best version of you up, it's not this. So come on, smarten up, and so little symptoms come appearing. I lose my voice, I get sick, I get the flu, I get a headache, suddenly I'm having mini strokes, heart attacks, one thing or another, or until I smarten up. So it's really interesting in that sense, right? At least from a pure neuroscientific point of view, just what feedback goes there. What goes on at the level of the body.
Yes, I always say, even though as course students, even though we understand in truth the body's a projection in the mind, it doesn't mean we don't take care of ourselves.
Beautiful.
And also the body can be used for that purpose of also for a different purpose. So that way, it gives you feedback. That's very valuable if it's giving you feedback if something's out of alignment in the mind. So that's great. It tells me, wow, something must be misaligned in my mind, or else, and so so it's that's what I I've been doing for quite a while now. My
Mhm.
body's it's a symbol. It's not reality, but
Mhm.
it can give me feedback if something's not quite, yes,
Yeah.
balanced in the mind. Yeah.
That's what we call good, good stress in psychology and neuroscience. Good stress is stress that comes from the body to trigger you to make a different choice, or to question your actions, to question your emotions, your thinking. And Jesus says in the course, to deny your experience at this level while you're in this vessel, learning your lessons and moving through life, is a particularly unworthy form of denial.
That's a very important point, because this is our experience here. So
Mhm.
as long as we all have deeply rooted beliefs, which we do, that we're still bodies, that's what we are, or we're attached in any way to the body or the world. If we have those beliefs, it wouldn't do us any good to
Mhm.
deny that, look, we need to take care of ourselves here as well. And so that's a very important point in the course. Jesus would never encourage us to neglect the body. He would
Mhm.
never,
Mhm.
ever encourage us to not take care of ourselves, because we
Mhm.
believe that we're here. There's a part of the mind that does. And as long as we do, and
Mhm.
we're not quite maybe at his level yet, that means, there's things that will, we'll probably be needing to use. And sometimes we'll need to use magic. Sometimes,
Yeah.
we need to be normal. We need to do what, sometimes make choices that helps us to assist us and bring us comfort, even at the
Mhm.
bodily level, because the mind would be too fearful, he says, to heal all at once.
Right.
Sometimes we need a
Right.
combination approach sometimes to
Yeah,
healing.
that's the loving thing to do in that
A loving
moment.
thing to
To
do.
love yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be
Yeah.
kind to yourself, to take care of yourself, to nurture yourself, to
Yeah.
say, oh, well, this is painful. Why is it painful? Then let me make another choice. Is there another way to look at the situation? Do I have any choices? What are my choices? What can
Yeah.
I do?
Yes. I
Mm.
think it's important we're talking about this, because I think a lot of us as
Mhm.
course students, it's very easy to fall into the trap of making it so much just about the mind, which it is about the mind. So don't get me
Yes.
wrong,
Yes.
but we tend to not take care of ourselves because we're just going mind, 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 mind. So we just let the
Yes.
body
Yes.
do we just let it go, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that can
Yeah.
happen too. That's a trap. It's a trap.
It is a trap, and
Yeah.
even some of the greatest teachers fall into it.
Yes,
So, and
absolutely.
I'm so glad that we're talking about that.
Yeah,
So
it's
glad.
really true.
Yeah.
And, I know people that, it's, and I understand, but when
Mhm.
you want to be kind of aware and careful about that, because there are people, Gary mentions this too, that we know
Mhm.
that tried to heal themselves only by using the mind. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that maybe they could have helped themselves a little more if they maybe, opened their minds up a bit more about, oh, maybe there's this treatment option, right, that could help me, that has to do with form, but maybe that could have helped them if they weren't trying to just use their mind.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's what we mean by combination approach, sometimes can assist us
Mhm.
and possibly, save a life.
Yeah,
Because
because there are consequences at the level of form, like you said.
sure,
I
sure.
mean, really, if you think that, a bullet coming at you is not going to go through, well, think again.
Right, right, right.
I mean, practicing forgiveness in that moment
Right.
is not very smart. Get
It's
out of harm's way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good example because look, you're probably not going to get that bullet out by the use of your mind. You got to go to the doctor, or you might have surgery.
Yeah.
This is no different
Yeah.
than any other form of right treat. I mean, it's all the same,
Yes. Yes.
and we're just using this as an example. But I mean, it's just one. I think it's very important, yeah, to talk about it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Then I want to talk a little bit about the principles of a teacher of A Course in Miracles, things like gentleness, joy, justice,
yeah,
honesty. They're discussed in the manual for teachers to perhaps imply that just because this world isn't real, you should not behave unkindly or unlovingly. It is hard to elevate yourself beyond the human condition if your choice departs from love. And I think I want to talk about this. I think this is very important because the history books are filled with individuals or institutions who use very big words, such as generosity, kindness, compassion, and love, but engage in abusive sexual, physical, emotional, psychological behavior. Right. So big words, but the actions don't follow. And, we know so many examples. You have the Catholic Church, and look, today is the 30th of September that we're doing this podcast, and it's a day of reconciliation and healing for the indigenous populations here in Canada, and the many children who have been murdered and found buried under residential schools. And this is just one of the very many other examples that we can find. You have Buddhist traditions or Buddhist cults where, they have certain leaders and they use such big words like loving kindness and generosity, compassion. And behind that are stories of sexual inappropriate conduct and abuse and other things that are just criminal behaviors. And yet, I want to talk about that. It's hard to elevate yourself beyond the human condition if your choice departs from love, just because you have power, just because you have authority, just because you're a renowned person in the so-called spiritual world, which, by the way, is such an oxymoron. We're all spiritual. Nobody's non-spiritual, but just because you are a name in the spiritual world, and just because you can do something unkind, you won't be able to elevate your spirit beyond this condition if you depart from love. And I think that's something I want to talk about.
Good topic. Arten and Persis said, intelligence without love is nothing. So you can be a great figure in history. You could be a powerful figure in our current contemporary times. You could be anybody that people might, on the outside, look up to or respect, and you could be a very, very smart and intelligent person, but if there's no love inspiring your actions, it really doesn't mean anything. And it's really, really important to cultivate the things, the characteristics of the teachers of God that the course is talking about, like generosity, right, kindness and honesty and joy and trust and all of that. We're all working toward that. We can have glimpses and moments of it in our everyday lives. When the course is talking about those things, it's talking about advanced teachers of God that have reached this state of complete empathy and compassion that goes beyond this level. And you can experience those qualities here, and we can all practice them. We can all cultivate them. To get, I think, a master at them requires, it kind of happens through, it can be through a difficult process sometimes, because we're still working on undoing our own egos. And as long as we still have some ego, a lot of us have good.
And we all do, or else we won't be here.
That's right. And we all do, or we wouldn't be here. Yeah. And we all have good, a lot of us do have good intentions, but we still want to watch sometimes, what is our motivation behind these things? So whom you're speaking of, maybe those examples of people that kind of play the game of compassion and kindness, and but maybe they have underneath sort of a not so loving intention, that comes from being partly also what the course calls and refers to unhealed healers. Unhealed healers, are those people who still, and all of us, again, I'm speaking of all of us to some degree, unless we're really, really in the real world, sort of where Jesus was in his final lifetime there, which is kind of what the course refers to as being in the real world, when everything truly is forgiven and you see a forgiven world. There's no more projection, and you're only listening to one voice, the voice of the Holy Spirit. Until that happens, all of us are going to go back and forth and shift back and forth. And even when we attempt to heal, because we're still unhealed healers, meaning there's still areas where we may be seeing our interests are separate from others. There still might be areas we're working on that we're still maybe holding some grievances, yet maybe some of it might be unconscious, but some of it is conscious. We're still judging, fall into the trap of judgment without even realizing it, because it becomes such a habit every day to judge the world, ourselves, and other people. So as long as we have those tendencies, we're really unhealed healers, and we're still healing from a place of, well, I am the healthy one and you're the sick one, or you're the one that needs help, but I don't, right? I've got it all together. In other words, unconsciously, we're really saying, I'm the innocent one and you're the guilty one. Yeah. Because you have the problem and I don't. That's an unhealed healer. Now, we might not consciously think that in our mind, oh, you're the sinful one, but that's to the ego. That's what's in our unconscious mind. And it's like wedged in there until we kind of start looking at ourselves and start looking where our motivation is coming from. Are we coming from a place of, oh, well, I'm the one who's a little bit, I'm better right now. I'm the better one. So I'm going to perform this healing, and I'm going to forgive this person because, wow, they really need it. You know, that kind of attitude. That just separates us.
It's creating more of this versus that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just another ego trick. You know, a healed mind, a healed healer would not see anyone's interests as separate from their own. They would have what the Course calls true empathy. You know, the ability to have compassion and understanding.
That's such key. Oh my gosh. Yes.
True empathy.
Yes.
True empathy.
True empathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is true empathy? What is true empathy? How does the Course define it?
Well, it's really the ability to have a deep understanding and awareness and compassion for another from a place of total non-judgment. It's your ability to join with that person's mind, not like they're joining with the body, but it's really about the ability of joining with the mind in a deep awareness and understanding that you're really one and you're really the same, and their call for love is your call for love, and that you know there's only one of us, and you're joining with the other out of a mutual awareness of abundance and what you really are, both of you, and everyone is really innocent in the Christ. And when you're joining in that way, that's true empathy. You're not, in other words, the difference between sympathy and empathy is completely opposite. It's making it the problem real and saying, well, you're sick, you're not well, and I feel sorry for you, right? Or you're coming from a sort of a place of feeling that, oh, that poor person, oh my gosh, they're
because this is your issue, not my issue. Therefore, right. I'm sympathetic towards you. But it's your issue, not mine.
And another form that
whereas empathy is no. Your problem is my problem. I see your interest as my own.
Yes. And you're seeing they're not joining in another person's dream of pain. Doesn't mean you don't be helpful or compassionate and kind. It just means in your mind, you're staying in your center and your right mind when you're with them. That's also part of empathy, is that when you're with them, you're very certain about what you are, and you're certain about what they are. You're nothing less than God, perfect spirit, whole and innocent, and you're not joining in their pain and suffering. But you're compassionate, and you're understanding and gentle and loving and kind and helpful.
Yeah, because you see the light within them, which is the light of all projected self, and it's a pathway. Empathy is a pathway to realize that the ideas do not leave their source. You are one with God, and you are looking upon yourself. I will see you as my friend, so that I may remember you're part of me and come to know myself. It's part of the forgiveness process.
Yes, and that's a beautiful part of the forgiveness process. Is really, really, again, not making that person or body something apart from you, that you're wholly joined in one purpose, in one goal. Yeah. And that goal is, actually, I love to refer to this line in the Course that reminds me of what we all really are. This is how we can see all our brothers and everyone. But Jesus says, look with fixed determination toward the light that shines beyond in perfect constancy. And when he says fixed determination, he knows that this takes practice to do this, not only to really remind and reinforce the truth in our own minds that all of us are the light of the world. I mean, we are truth. We are pure truth, pure love, pure innocence. So when we're also looking with that fixed constancy and try to practice seeing that light in others, that's really, really what it means to see with spiritual sight. And remember that we're all joined. So it's a very I use that in my own meditations. That line.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, Cindy.
Yeah.
That is so beautiful. I just so much love learning from you. I love you describing this process. It's so beautiful. You know, you made me think of those qualities of the teacher of God: gentleness, joy, justice, defenselessness, truth, honesty. To embrace those qualities means to really go beyond your human condition, make a choice for everybody around you. It's about a shift. It's an internal shift that when that happens, the world doesn't change, you change.
Right.
And it is in that moment that you really start to climb the ladder of waking up. When you make that choice and you understand that through your demonstration, others learn, and that you ought to hold that on light yourself. It's the only way. You need to shift, because the world is going to do what the world does. It's going to shift and change all the time.
Yep.
So unless you make that choice, the choice to abide to your highest principles of unity and oneness and love, unless you choose to do what love does all the time, you're trapped into this world of shift and change.
That is absolutely right. The shift happens within yourself first. Yes, first. That's absolutely a very, very good point, because when you shift, it's true that the world that is still the projection may not shift and change, because the world is in constant flux. It's always going to shift and change. But I mean, when you are making the internal shift, again, from the ego to the Holy Spirit's thought system, from the wrong mind to the right mind, another way of saying the same thing, and you're doing that consistently on a consistent basis, what you see is a world then as a reflection of what you're thinking. Not that the world specifically will change, but your experience of the world changes. Like you might, that's what's so powerful about this. The world doesn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything. It's just there as a effect. It's just, and that never changes. In fact, if just to go just to get into a tiny bit of the concept of how time works and parallel realities, if you're in your right mind and you start to, the more you forgive, and let's say the ego is kind of chipping away, it's being undone more and more, and you're experiencing more peace. What happens is that the version of the world that you're seeing, you can actually, another scenario can play out where it might look like it's the same world, but it's not, because they're in the illusion. There are many, many, many within the illusion, of course, there are though many, many parallel realities. And we don't know when we're shifting between one or the other. And that's why it's so amazing that when you're on this path and you're working on forgiveness and yourself, and which is a loving thing to do, we don't know what the Holy Spirit, remember the Holy Spirit's part we can't really see, but the Holy Spirit is taking all the work we do of forgiveness and applying it in the mind where it needs to go. And sometimes that means, without us even realizing it, You can shift dimensions of time. You might have a gentler scenario play out where maybe because you've learned a lesson, maybe you don't have to have, as harsh of a lesson, or you won't, in other words, you won't experience it as harsher. But the point is your mind is changing when you're undoing the ego. And part of that means we're actively involved in watching our thoughts. We have to be sort of active participants in the process of just doing our part, which is just identifying the cause when we do feel triggered by something, when we feel upset. We look within first and identify the cause. And then we trust that the Holy Spirit will handle a part of the mind that we can't see. And so all of this comes with practice, learning to develop this trust in the Holy Spirit, who's really our best. I always like to say the Holy Spirit's like your best friend.
Yeah.
It's your best companion. Because it knows you as you really are in truth. It knows you as whole and in your innocence. So you can trust the Holy Spirit, that it will always do its part. But we do need to, Jesus says, in the Course, do not deny the little steps, right, to take that I ask of you, because the steps he's talking about really is forgiveness.
Ask and then and engage in forgiveness. Ask for guidance and follow through the process of forgiveness that the Course teaches about. Now, would you mind very much if I'll ask you to go through that process of forgiveness again, and maybe pick up a scenario, just a made up scenario of, say, a woman is in an abusive situation and she's being, physically and emotionally and psychologically abused, and nobody knows outside her home, right? Because she's trying to protect the abuser. She thinks, like so many women, that his bad behavior is her responsibility. She wants to be loving, right? And she compromises her own truth. Now, walk me through the process of forgiveness, of how do you go from a state of denying your own true self and truth for somebody else, right? How do you go from that to awakening to the one mind and remembering that ideas do not leave their source? Because in my ego mind, I think ideas leave their source, right? That's the ego's the dilemma.
Yes, the ego strategy is, it's good to actually start there with that. Ego strategy is to make us mindless, to forget that we have a mind, that we are decision makers, not, we're not the body, and our body and no other body is the decision maker for us. The world is not the decision maker for you. Other people aren't the decision maker. All of us are our own decision makers. So we are mind, and that's what the ego does not want us to see, because that means then the ego is no longer in charge. The ego is basically non-existent when we remember the love in our minds. It doesn't want us to remember the love in our minds because it equates that with death. It equates it with death.
And the death of the separated self.
That's right. And that's what the ego wants. So it's hard to really look at the fact that the ego and all of us, in a way, and the Course addresses this, it's like we want to be unfairly treated. I mean, at an unconscious level, not at a conscious level, but at an unconscious level, we want to be unfairly treated so that someone else gets to be,
blamed for it.
Yeah. So that if we understand first, like, what the strategy is, then we can kind of see the insanity of that thought system and just look at it for what it is, and then we have to also look at the same tune we're playing to ourselves over and over again. And one example could be, do I feel like a victim of this? So we want to, and not only do I feel like a victim, which is understandable at first if we do, but we just want to look, that's all, at what we're thinking. And if we start to fall into the trap of victimhood, we can start to ask ourselves, remind ourselves, remember, perhaps there's another way to look at this. But we have to first hear the tune that we play over and over to ourselves about the situation or the person. Then we want to gently remind ourselves, well, perhaps there's another way to look at this. What can I lose by asking? And part of the forgiveness comes in when we first have the willingness to say, well, maybe there is another way, right? There's got to be another way, right? That I can look at this. And so forgiveness would be, well, first, if I feel upset or unfairly treated in any way, no matter what form that takes, identify the cause of feeling that way. That's the first step really in forgiveness, is we have to identify and remind ourselves, well, maybe I'm not upset for the reason that I think. Now, this doesn't mean I'll get to the sort of sample scenario of an abuser, but I just want to start here, where in the mind, we would recognize that if I'm feeling upset, okay, the Course reminds me that I'm never upset for the reason I think. I'm never unfairly treated for the reason I think. I'm never worried for the reason I think. I'm never anxious for the reason I think. Right? You could substitute anything in there, because the reason why we're really upset is we've allowed, at least unconsciously, we're allowing the ego to dominate our mind, and its thought system. We're listening to that voice instead of the voice of truth. So that causes us to be upset that we're perpetuating the thought of separation once again, and it's just taking this particular form.
And this is the process at the level of mind, of course.
Yes, a level of mind. So once we work and just remind ourselves of that, it doesn't mean, though, in the level of behavior, that you don't address the situation. It doesn't mean, in fact, in most cases of abuse, it would not be very loving to not address it.
Absolutely.
So you still would, in an abusive situation, because if you don't
get out of harm's way, get out of harm's way.
Yes, you would want to. In fact, that might even be the first step. You get out of the way first before you even maybe start to do the mind work, because you want to be safe.
Right on.
Loving to be safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because that really brings you into a loving state where you can engage in forgiveness. You can't engage in forgiveness in a frenzy state where you're feeling safe and you're attacked, and there's no way out of that through this process.
Yes, and that wouldn't be very logical to try to, in a fear-based state, to try to work around that in the midst of an abusive situation. So it's very loving and kind to say sometimes, you know what, I think I need to remove myself from this. I need to, this is not working for me, right? This is not serving me. And it doesn't serve the other person either, who appears to be on the abuser, because it's just reinforcing the guilt in everyone in the mind to let that go on.
Yeah.
It just reinforces the guilt. So it absolutely is a kind thing and a loving thing to address any form of abuse. And then of course, in the mind, when you are feeling in a safe place, and not that you can't do this in the midst of turmoil. Jesus actually says, even in chaos, you can return your mind to peace. I mean, he does say that. So that's possible to do that.
True.
Yeah. But sometimes it's not, right? Yeah, it's not that easy sometimes. So
it's not easy, but it's possible.
But I like to always say it's possible, because he does say that you could be, I know this is you could be in a very horrific situation, yet have peace in your mind. It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. So I always just want to say that, so it doesn't, because that's how powerful we are as minds.
Yes, I can be abused with words and physically, but I cannot be touched. Who I am cannot be touched.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. The real you, who you really are, really can't be hurt in any way if we remember to identify with that part of the mind. It does take practice, that's for sure. I mean, it does take practice, but it can happen instantly. We can change our minds, but if it doesn't, no one should feel guilty about that. It's a process sometimes, and we can always practice forgiveness later. So if you have to remove yourself in a situation and you can't, I can't do all this work, right? no, it's not about that. It's about being loving and kind to yourself. Sometimes that means, no, I gotta do what I gotta do right now. And then when you're feeling centered and ready, you can always, at some point, you can work at the mind level and work with
Yeah,
forgiveness.
yeah.
Absolutely.
I love how Artin and Persa in Gary's first book, The Disappearance of the Universe, tells him if somebody's about to rape you, what you do is you kick them as hard as you can. You shout, you run,
Yeah,
and
right.
let's worry about forgiveness later.
Yeah, you don't have to sit there and say if I defend myself, I'm attacked. So, but I gotta forgive this. No, you know what? You gotta be safe first. In a situation like that, you wanna get out of harm's way. Yeah, I mean that's the normal, loving, kind thing to do. Just and then of course later at some point you might, yes, the forgiveness would come up. You may have a forgiveness opportunity there. So you do at some point, it's very wise to really look at that and ask yourself, is to start the process. In other words, get this process going. And there's no rule about, you got to do it, the next day, or there's no time frame. You just go within your process, just do your process and trust that, you have the same ability as anyone else to work your mind back to a place of peace and to forgive. I mean, we all do. We have the same potential to do that, to join with the Holy Spirit. Yeah. And so that's the loving thing.
That's the loving thing. Yeah. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for being my guest again today, for engaging in a conversation with me further about this topic that is very close to my heart. And I know to the hearts of many of our listeners. I have a friend, Linell, who's taking a level 2 course in A Course in Miracles with me and a group of ours that started this at the beginning of the year. And she's so excited to listen to what you have to say. So I know she will be listening to this intently.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. And I always enjoy our discussions and talking with you about these
Thank you.
great topics that are just, I think, so relevant and important, always. Yeah. So thank you for having me on.
Yes, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you for letting us all learn from you. We learn from each other. We all grow together and we all heal together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
thank you, Cindy. Until next time.
Until next time.
And this concludes our interview with Cindy Lora-Renard. To find out more about Cindy or to purchase one of her most recent books, The Business of Forgiveness or A Course in Health and Well-Being, please visit her website at www.cindylora.com. I'm looking forward to having Cindy again on this program and chatting more with her about cancer and survivorship and a new way of looking at it. Until then, be well and take care of yourselves.